In the remote wilderness of whispering pines, where the boundary between the wild and human world had always been respected but never truly understood, a grieving community discovered something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the souls of those who walk on four paws. For 3 consecutive winters, a massive grizzly bear visited the same grave, leaving rangers baffled until they placed hidden cameras and uncovered a truth so profound it would change how they viewed these magnificent creatures forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Whispering Pines had always been a place where nature seemed to hold dominion over human ambition. Perched on the edge of North America's last great wilderness, this community of barely 500 souls existed in a delicate balance with the rugged landscape that surrounded them. Rusted pickup trucks navigated the town's few paved roads, while log cabins and modest homes with metal roofs dotted the landscape, smoke spiraling from stone chimneys into the crisp mountain air. The forests pressed close against the town's boundaries, a constant reminder that here humans were merely guests in a world ruled by ancient rhythms and wild creatures. The main street consisted of just a dozen weathered buildings, a general store that doubled as the post office, a small medical clinic, a diner where everyone knew not just your name but your usual order, and a ranger station that served as the community's connection to the vast, protected wilderness that was both their backyard and their livelihood. Tourism sustained Whispering Pines for 3 precious months of summer, but when winter descended, bringing snow that often reached the second-story windows, the town turned inward, surviving on community bonds forged through generations of isolation. The late autumn air carried the sharp scent of pine and the sweet, earthy aroma of decaying leaves. Morning frost painted delicate patterns on windows and transformed fallen leaves into fragile works of art that crunched underfoot. The calendar marked mid-October, and already the surrounding mountains wore caps of early snow, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds that promised more to come. The shortened days and lengthening nights signaled to every living thing that the harsh winter would soon arrive, a time to retreat, to conserve, to survive. Whispering Pines Cemetery occupied a gentle slope at the western edge of town, where the last streetlight gave way to wilderness. A simple wrought-iron gate marked the entrance to the hallowed ground, its hinges protesting softly in the chill breeze. Inside, weathered headstones documented the town's history more thoroughly than any written record, telling stories of pioneers, children lost too young to harsh winters, and elders who had lived full lives in this unforgiving but beautiful place. Ancient pine trees stood as sentinels around the perimeter, their branches forming a protective canopy over the departed, needle-covered ground, muffling footsteps into respectful silence. Unlike the manicured cemeteries of larger towns, Whispering Pines allowed nature to reclaim its own in subtle ways. Wildflowers grew between graves in summer, fallen pine cones rested against headstones, and occasionally deer would graze peacefully among the markers at dawn. This seeming neglect was actually intentional, a philosophy that death was not separate from the natural world, but a return to it. The wilderness didn't stop at the cemetery's edge, but flowed through it, embracing those who had returned to the earth. Ranger Michael Hawkins felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders as he navigated his Forest Service truck along the winding road that led to the cemetery. At 43, with streaks of silver beginning to appear in his dark beard, Michael had spent his entire adult life protecting the wilderness surrounding Whispering Pines. The past 20 years as a park ranger had taught him to respect the delicate balance between human settlement and wild nature, and he'd prided himself on understanding both worlds. Today, however, he faced a mystery that defied his considerable experience. Beside him sat Dr. Sophia Chen, the wildlife biologist, who had arrived from the State University just yesterday. Her presence in the truck was a testament to how unusual and increasingly concerning the situation had become. At 38, with a quiet confidence and reputation for innovative research on large predator behavior, Sophia had initially been skeptical when Michael had reached out. Bears occasionally wandered into human settlements, especially in poor mast years when food was scarce. But this was different. This bear wasn't raiding garbage cans or breaking into cabins looking for easy meals. Its behavior followed a pattern that had no precedent in scientific literature. "I appreciate you coming all this way, Dr. Chen," Michael said, breaking the contemplative silence as they approached the cemetery. "I know it sounds far-fetched." Sophia adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and offered a measured smile. "Please, call me Sophia." And actually, unusual behavioral patterns are precisely what interest me most. Animals are always more complex than we give them credit for. She gestured toward the folder resting between them on the console. "Your documentation is impressively thorough. 3 consecutive years, same time frame, same location. That's not random." Michael nodded, grateful for her open-minded approach. "It's the specificity that's most disturbing. Hundreds of graves in that cemetery, but always the same one. And the behavior doesn't match food-seeking or any other normal pattern." As the truck rounded the final bend, the wrought-iron gates of Whispering Pine Cemetery came into view. Already waiting beside a town maintenance truck stood Mayor Eleanor Blackwood and Sam Redfeather, the town's oldest resident and unofficial historian. Eleanor stepped forward as Michael parked, her practical hiking boots and heavy jacket a far cry from the formal attire one might expect from a mayor. But in Whispering Pines, pragmatism always trumped ceremony. "Ranger Hawkins!" she called, extending a gloved hand first to Michael and then to Sophia. "And you must be Dr. Chen. Thank you for coming. I hope the drive wasn't too treacherous." "The roads were fine," Sophia assured her, studying the mayor with interest. Eleanor Blackwood didn't fit the stereotype of a small-town mayor. In her early 60s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes that missed nothing, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned respect rather than demanded it. "This is Sam Redfeather," Eleanor continued, gesturing to the elderly man who stood slightly apart, his weathered face impassive beneath a worn cowboy hat. "His family has been in this valley since before it was called Whispering Pines. If anyone understands this place, it's Sam." Sam nodded slightly, but remained silent, his dark eyes reflecting decades of accumulated wisdom. At 87, he had seen the town transform from a remote outpost to a tourist destination, yet something in his bearing suggested he still carried the original spirit of the place within him. His native heritage was evident not just in his features, but in the respectful way he stood on the land, as if constantly aware of his place within a larger natural order. "We've got the equipment you requested," Eleanor said, turning back to Michael and pointing to several large cases in the back of the maintenance truck. Trail cameras, motion sensors, the works. Town council approved the emergency budget request. Yesterday, Michael raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Eleanor's expression grew serious. People are scared, Michael. The sighting 2 days ago was too close to town. A grizzly repeatedly visiting our cemetery is concerning enough, but now folks are wondering if it's developing a taste for visiting the living as well. There's been no aggressive behavior reported, Michael reminded her. In fact, that's part of what makes this so unusual. The bear comes, visits the same grave, and leaves without disturbing anything else. Sam Redfeather spoke for the first time, his voice low and gravelly from years of pipe smoking. Not everything unusual is dangerous. When the others turned to look at him, he shrugged, just saying we should watch before we judge. Sophia nodded appreciatively at the elderly man. Mr. Redfeather's right. We need data before we can draw conclusions. That's why the monitoring equipment is so important. Eleanor sighed, clearly caught between scientific restraint and her responsibilities to a worried community. Well, let's get it set up then. The forecast is calling for snow by tomorrow night, and I'd rather have everything in place before then. Together, the four made their way through the cemetery gates. The morning sunlight filtered through the pine branches, casting dappled shadows across the graves. A hushed silence seemed to blanket the area, broken only by the occasional call of a raven from the nearby forest. Michael led them along the winding path toward the cemetery's western edge, where newer graves gave testament to more recent losses. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The grave in question is just up ahead, he explained to Sophia. Rebecca Stevens died 3 years ago this month, age 32. Sophia frowned. So young. May I ask the cause? Eleanor answered, her voice softening. Cancer, diagnosed at stage 4. She fought for about 8 months, but... She shook her head. Rebecca was special, worked as a wildlife photographer, spent more time in the backcountry than most of our rangers, had a way with animals that seemed almost supernatural sometimes. She understood respect, Sam interjected quietly, treated the wilderness like it had a soul. They rounded a large pine tree, and Michael gestured to a simple granite headstone. Unlike many of the others, this one was relatively new, the engraving still crisp against the polished surface. The name Rebecca Stevens was followed by the dates marking her brief life, and below that a simple epitaph. She spoke the language of wild things. What immediately drew their attention, however, were the signs of recent visitation. The ground around the grave showed clear disturbance, massive paw prints pressed into the soft earth, patches where something large had apparently sat or perhaps laid down. Several pine cones had been arranged in what almost appeared to be a deliberate pattern atop the grave. Sophia knelt beside one of the prints, pulling a small measuring tape from her pocket. Definitely grizzly, she confirmed, after taking measurements. Large male, I'd estimate around 700 pounds based on the depth and size of the print. Same as the previous years, Michael noted, pointing to his documentation. The prints match exactly. Eleanor hugged herself against a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I still don't understand why, Rebecca. There are hundreds of graves here. Sam had moved to stand directly before the headstone, his expression unreadable as he studied the arranged pine cones. "Perhaps," he said softly, "the bear has its reasons." Sophia rose from her examination of the tracks. "Bears have excellent memories and complex emotional lives, much more so than we've traditionally given them credit for. There could be a connection we don't yet understand." "That's why we're here," Michael affirmed, moving back toward the truck. "Let's get these cameras set up. If the pattern holds, the bear will return. This time we'll see exactly what it does." The next 2 hours were spent strategically placing trail cameras and motion sensors around Rebecca's grave and the cemetery perimeter. Designed to be unobtrusive, the high-definition cameras would activate with any movement, capturing video both day and night thanks to infrared capabilities. Michael and Sophia worked with practiced efficiency, while Eleanor helped distribute equipment, and Sam observed silently, occasionally offering suggestions about optimal placement based on his knowledge of local wildlife movement patterns. As they worked, the sky gradually darkened, the morning's tentative sunshine giving way to thickening clouds that promised early snow. The temperature dropped noticeably, and breath began to form visible clouds before their faces. By the time the last camera was secured, the first few snowflakes had begun to drift lazily downward. "Perfect timing," Eleanor remarked, looking upward at the grey sky. "First snow always feels like a turning point." Sam nodded sagely. "The veil grows, thin this time of year, between worlds." Michael chose not to comment on Sam's cryptic statement, instead focusing on practical matters. "The cameras are all set to transmit data directly to my laptop. If anything approaches the grave, we'll know immediately." "How long do you think we'll need to wait?" Eleanor asked, brushing snowflakes from her jacket sleeve. "Given the pattern from previous years, I'd expect activity within the next 72 hours, Michael replied. "The bear has consistently visited during the first heavy snow of the season, just before denning up for winter." Sophia had been quiet for several minutes, her attention fixed on Rebecca's headstone. "I'd like to know more about her," she said, suddenly. "About her connection to wildlife, specifically bears, if there was any." Eleanor and Michael exchanged glances. "There's someone you should meet then," Eleanor said finally. "Rebecca's brother, James. He still lives in her cabin at the edge of town, keeps all her photographs, her journals. If anyone can tell you about Rebecca's connection to these mountains and the creatures in them, it's James." As they made their way back to the vehicles, the snowfall intensified, transforming the cemetery into a scene of ethereal beauty. White flakes settled on ancient headstones and evergreen boughs, creating a landscape that blurred the line between earth and sky. Michael found himself glancing back at Rebecca's grave, now barely visible through the thickening snow, and wondering what secrets it might hold. Secrets apparently known only to one massive grizzly bear, who defied all normal behavior patterns to pay its respects. The drive to Rebecca Stevens' cabin took them along the western outskirts of Whispering Pines, where the town gradually surrendered to wilderness. Unlike the more established neighborhoods closer to town center, this area featured homes set far apart, each carved out of the forest like individual islands in a sea of pines. The road narrowed and turned to gravel, snow already accumulating in the less-traveled tracks. "James keeps to himself these days," Eleanor explained from the back seat of Michael's truck. "After Rebecca died, he just sort of retreated, takes odd jobs around town, but mostly lives off Rebecca's photography royalties and spends his time organizing her work. Were they close? Sophia asked, watching the forest thicken around them. Inseparable as children, Eleanor replied. Their parents died in an accident when James was 15 and Rebecca 13. They only had each other after that. When Rebecca got sick, James moved back from Seattle to care for her. Michael slowed the truck as they approached a small clearing, where a cabin stood partially hidden among tall pines. Unlike many of the newer vacation homes that dotted the region, this structure had been built to blend with its surroundings. Constructed of weathered logs, with a metal roof now gathering snow, it featured large windows that looked out into the forest, and a wraparound porch stacked with firewood. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, disappearing into the snowy sky. "This is it?" Eleanor said. "Rebecca built this place herself about 10 years ago. Said she wanted to live as close to her subjects as possible." As they parked beside an older model Jeep, the cabin's door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. James Stevens appeared to be in his early 40s, tall and lean with the same dark hair as the woman in the photographs Eleanor had shown them, though his was streaked with premature grey. He wore flannel and denim, practical clothes for the mountain climate, and his beard was neatly trimmed, contrasting with the overall impression of someone who didn't venture into town often. "Mayor Blackwood," he acknowledged, his voice quiet, but carrying across the clearing. His eyes moved to Michael, whom he clearly recognized, and then settled with obvious curiosity on Sophia. "Ranger Hawkins and Dr. Sophia Chen," Eleanor supplied as they approached the porch. "Wildlife biologist. She's here about the situation at Rebecca's grave." Something flickered across James's face. Not surprise. Sophia noted with interest, but something more complex. Resignation, perhaps, or confirmation of something long suspected. "You'd better come inside," he said after a moment. "The storm's picking up." The interior of the cabin was warm and surprisingly spacious, with an open floor plan that allowed the heat from a wood-burning stove to reach every corner. What immediately captured Sophia's attention, however, were the photographs that covered nearly every wall, breathtaking images of wildlife in their natural habitats. Bears fishing in rushing streams, wolves moving through misty forests, mountain lions perched on rocky outcroppings, and countless birds captured in flight. The technical skill was evident, but there was something more in these images, an intimacy, as if the photographer had been accepted rather than merely tolerated by her wild subjects. "Rebecca's work," James confirmed, following Sophia's gaze. "She had a gift." "They're extraordinary," Sophia said with genuine admiration. "The animals seemed so at ease with her presence." James moved to a sideboard and began pouring coffee into mugs without asking if they wanted any. The practiced movement suggested this was more about giving himself something to do than actual hospitality. "Rebecca used to say that to photograph wildlife properly, you had to become part of the landscape, not just hide or use long lenses, but actually convince the animals you belonged there as much as they did." He distributed the coffee and gestured for them to sit at a large table crafted from a single slab of pine. Various folders and boxes were stacked at one end, what appeared to be an ongoing archiving project. "Mr. Stevens," Michael began once. They were seated. "I believe the mayor has informed you about the unusual activity at your sister's grave." James's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around his mug. "The bear." "Yes, she told me." "Has it happened again?" he asked, looking up with sudden intensity. Michael nodded. "2 days ago. Same behavior as the previous years. It visits only her grave, stays for a period of time without disturbing anything, and then leaves. We've set up cameras," Eleanor added. "If it returns, we'll be able to observe exactly what it's doing." James was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it might contain answers. Finally, he looked up at Sophia. "And they brought you here to determine if it's dangerous, I suppose. If it needs to be relocated, or—" The unspoken alternative hung in the air. "I'm here to understand," Sophia clarified gently. "This behavior is unusual, but not necessarily threatening. Bears typically avoid human spaces unless conditioned to associate them with food, which doesn't seem to be the case here." "No," James agreed quietly. "It's not about food." Something in his tone caught Sophia's attention. "Mr. Stevens, do you have any insight into why this particular bear might be visiting your sister's grave?" James was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he stood abruptly and moved to a bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound album. "Rebecca kept journals of all her wildlife encounters," he explained, returning to the table. "Dates, locations, behaviors. She was meticulous. It's why her work was valued by scientific publications as well as artistic ones." He opened the album, revealing pages of handwritten notes interspersed with photographs. About 5 years ago, Rebecca began documenting a specific grizzly she'd encountered multiple times in the North Valley. She called him Samson. He flipped through several pages, showing them photographs of an enormous male grizzly with a distinctive scar across his muzzle. Even to Sophia's experienced eye, the bear was exceptional, not just in size, but in the intelligent quality of his gaze as he looked directly into Rebecca's camera. "She started finding him regularly," James continued. "Or maybe he was finding her. Rebecca claimed he recognized her, that he'd sometimes appear where she was setting up equipment as if he knew her schedule." He hesitated. "Most people thought she was anthropomorphizing, of course." "But you didn't," Sophia prompted when he fell silent. James shook his head slowly. "I saw them together once, not close. She never violated safety protocols, but there was an understanding between them, like they'd established some kind of communication." He turned more pages, revealing a chronological documentation of encounters spanning nearly 2 years. The progression was remarkable. The distance between photographer and subject gradually decreased, the bear's behavior increasingly relaxed in Rebecca's presence. "The last year of her life, when she was sick," James said, his voice growing thicker with emotion, "she couldn't go into the backcountry anymore. It hit her harder than the chemo, honestly, being confined to the cabin while her strength failed." He stopped at a final photograph that made everyone at the table lean forward in astonishment. It showed Rebecca's cabin, this very cabin, viewed from the edge of the clearing. In the foreground, partially obscured by pine branches but unmistakable, was the massive form of Samson, apparently watching the cabin from the forest's edge. "He came here," James whispered, "3 times during her last month. Never approached the cabin, never tried to break in for food, just watched. Rebecca said he was checking on her." Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "That's extraordinary behavior, but also concerning from a wildlife management perspective." A bear that comfortable around humans. He wasn't comfortable around humans, James interrupted firmly. He was comfortable around Rebecca. There's a difference. He never approached anyone else, never caused problems in town or at campsites. He recognized her specifically. So Sophia studied the photograph intently, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. There are documented cases of wild animals forming bonds with specific humans, though it's rare with large predators like grizzlies. She looked up at James. When did your sister die exactly? October 18th, 3 years ago. And when did the bear first appear at her grave? The first heavy snow after her funeral, October 23rd. Eleanor gasped softly. You knew? All this time you knew it was the same bear? James nodded slowly. I suspected. The ranger's reports mentioned the scar on its muzzle. He looked at Michael. I should have said something, I know. But I was afraid of what would happen to him if I did. Outside, the snow had intensified, transforming the world beyond the windows into a swirling white void. The wind had picked up, occasionally gusting against the cabin with enough force to make the structure creak in response. The weather seemed to underscore the gravity of their conversation, isolating them in this moment of revelation. Michael checked his phone, then looked up with renewed urgency. The first camera was just triggered at the cemetery. Something large is moving among the graves. Eleanor stood immediately. Is it the bear? The angle isn't clear yet, Michael replied, studying his screen. But whatever it is, it's heading toward Rebecca's grave. James was already reaching for his coat. I need to be there. Sophia caught his arm gently. Mr. Stevens, if it is Samson, we need to be extremely careful not to disturb whatever is happening. This could be critically important for understanding bear behavior and cognition. I've waited 3 years to understand why he keeps returning to my sister, James said, his voice breaking slightly. I need to see it with my own eyes. The decision was made in silent agreement. Minutes later, they were back in Michael's truck, navigating the increasingly treacherous road toward town. The snowfall had transformed into a proper mountain blizzard, limiting visibility and forcing them to move at a crawl. Michael drove with the focused concentration of someone who knew these roads intimately, while Sophia continued to monitor the camera feeds on his laptop. It's definitely the bear, she confirmed, turning the screen so the others could see the grainy night vision footage. Same distinctive scar on the muzzle. He's circling the grave now. James leaned forward from the back seat, his breath catching, as he watched the massive grizzly moving with surprising delicacy around his sister's final resting place. What is he doing? It's hard to tell from this angle, Sophia admitted, but he seems to be arranging something. The truck's headlights cut through the swirling snow as they approached the cemetery gate. Michael parked as close as possible, then turned to address the group with the seriousness the situation demanded. We need to be absolutely clear about how we approach this, he said firmly. This is a wild grizzly, regardless of any prior history with Rebecca. Our priority has to be safety first, observation second. We'll stay in the truck, Eleanor agreed quickly. Use the zoom lenses on the cameras to document from here. James said nothing, his eyes fixed on the cemetery gate barely visible through the snow. In the glow of the dashboard lights, his face revealed a complex mixture of emotions, grief, wonder, and a desperate need for understanding. Sophia turned in her seat to face him directly. James, I know how important this is to you, but the best way to honor whatever connection existed between your sister and this bear is to observe without interfering." After a long moment, he nodded, though the tension in his body suggested the agreement came at a cost. With the truck's engine idling to maintain heat, they watched the camera feeds in silence. The bear had settled now beside Rebecca's grave, its massive body forming a dark mound against the snow-covered ground. Occasionally it would rise, circle the grave, and then return to its position of apparent rest. "This goes against everything we understand about grizzly behavior," Sophia murmured, her scientific curiosity fully engaged. "Especially with winter approaching. He should be focused on final feeding before denning up, not visiting a cemetery." "Unless this is more important to him than feeding," James replied softly. The minutes stretched into an hour, the storm intensifying around them while the bear remained at its vigil. Then, just as Michael was beginning to worry about road conditions, for their return journey, the bear rose again and began to dig. "Oh no," Eleanor whispered. "Is he trying to dig up the grave?" Sophia leaned closer to the screen. "No, the digging is too shallow and focused. He's uncovering something." They watched in astonishment as the bear's powerful paws carefully moved snow and earth aside, revealing what appeared to be a small bundle partially buried at the foot of the headstone. With movements shockingly delicate for such a massive predator, the bear nudged the object free and then sat back as if contemplating it. "Can we zoom in?" James asked urgently. "What is that?" Michael adjusted the camera controls, bringing the object into clearer focus. It appeared to be some kind of leather pouch or bag, now weathered and dirty from being buried. "That's Rebecca's field bag," James breathed, recognition dawning. "The small one she used to carry her journals when photographing. But how?" Before he could finish, they watched as the bear gently nudged the bag with its nose, causing it to open slightly. From inside, something small and light-colored fell onto the snow. The bear lowered its massive head, nosing the object gently, then raised its muzzle toward the dark sky and released a low, rumbling sound that the camera's microphone barely captured. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something that, even through electronic transmission, carried an unmistakable quality of sorrow. James's hand was on the door handle before anyone could stop him. "James, no!" Michael's command came too late as the door swung open, allowing a blast of snow and cold air into the truck's warm interior. "He won't hurt me," James called back, already pushing through the deepening snow toward the cemetery gate. Sophia and Michael exchanged a quick glance before following, leaving Eleanor with instructions to stay in the truck and call for help if necessary. The snow had accumulated to mid-calf level, making their progress difficult as they followed James's determined path toward the gravesite. Through the swirling white, they could see the bear's massive form still positioned beside Rebecca's grave. It had gone completely still, head raised, obviously aware of their approach. Michael's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, though he desperately hoped he wouldn't need to use it. James slowed as he reached the cemetery proper, his earlier confidence apparently tempered by the reality of standing less than 50 yards from a creature that could kill him with a single blow. He stopped, visibility around him reduced to just a few yards by the heavy snowfall. "Samson," he called, his voice carrying strangely in the snow-muffled air. "I'm Rebecca's brother." For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the dark, shaped by the grave, shifted, and the bear rose to its full height on its hind legs, towering nearly 9 feet tall, its silhouette monstrous against the snowy background. Michael drew his weapon. "No," Sophia hissed urgently. "Look, he's not charging, he's looking." Indeed, the bear remained in place, swaying slightly as it stood upright, head moving as if trying to catch their scent through the confusing swirl of snow. After what seemed an eternity, it dropped back to all fours and turned its attention back to the object that had fallen from the bag. "It's safe to approach," Sophia whispered, slowly. Together, the three moved forward with measured steps, until they were close enough to see clearly what had held the bear's attention for 3 consecutive years. There, partially covered by fresh snow but unmistakable, lay a sealed plastic sandwich bag containing what appeared to be photographs. With the bear watching from less than 20 feet away, its breathing visible in the cold air, James knelt and picked up the bag. Inside were 3 photographs, protected from the elements by the waterproof plastic. His hands trembled as he held them up to see in the dim light. The first showed Rebecca at her most vibrant, standing beside a waterfall with camera equipment, smiling broadly at whoever was taking the picture. The second was a stunning close-up of Samson himself, his intelligent eyes looking directly into the camera, the scar on his muzzle clearly visible. The third photograph, however, caused James to sink to his knees in the snow. It showed Rebecca in the late stages of her illness, thin and pale, sitting on the porch of her cabin, and at the edge of the frame, partially visible in the tree line, was the unmistakable form of Samson watching over her. Beneath the photographs was a handwritten note, protected by the same plastic bag. In Rebecca's distinctive handwriting, it read simply, "Some souls recognize each other across all boundaries. Look for me in the wild places." The bear watched, silently, as James's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, it lowered itself to a seated position, as if participating in this moment of shared grief. And in that extraordinary tableau, a mourning man kneeling in the snow, a massive predator keeping respectful vigil, and 2 witnesses frozen in astonishment, the truth of what had brought them all together finally emerged. As heartbreaking as it was beautiful, love did not obey the boundaries humans created to separate themselves from the wild world. It moved where it would, recognized kindred spirits regardless of species, and sometimes, in the rarest and most precious of cases, it transcended even death itself. While the snow continued to fall, transforming whispering pines into a world of soft white edges and muffled sounds, 4 figures remained motionless in a cemetery, where the line between the wild and the tame, between ending and continuation, had never seemed more beautifully blurred. The snow continued to fall through the night, transforming whispering pines into a glistening wonderland by morning. Sunlight broke through scattered clouds, casting the town in a magical light that belied the extraordinary events of the previous evening. The storm had left nearly 18 inches of fresh powder, forcing the small community to shift into their well-practiced winter routines, driveways being cleared, snow chains attached to tires, and neighborly checks on the elderly. Residents who might need assistance. At the ranger station, Michael Hawkins sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, with a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside him. The footage from the cemetery cameras played on a loop, documenting what would have seemed impossible had he not witnessed it himself. The massive grizzly bear, Samson, as Rebecca Stevens had named him, gently digging at the grave, uncovering the leather bag, and maintaining a peaceful vigil despite the approach of humans. It defied everything Michael had learned in his 2 decades of wildlife management. A knock at his office door broke his reverie. Dr. Sophia Chen entered, her expression suggesting she had slept as little as he had. She carried her own laptop and a notebook filled with hastily scribbled observations. "I've been reviewing the footage all night," she said without preamble, pulling up a chair beside his desk. "This is unprecedented in ursine behavioral studies. A bear forming such a specific bond with a human, and then demonstrating what can only be described as mourning behavior after her death. It challenges our entire understanding of animal cognition." Michael rubbed his tired eyes. "The scientific implications are fascinating, I'm sure, but my immediate concern is more practical. I've got a 700-pound grizzly visiting a town cemetery. The Department of Wildlife will expect me to take action, regardless of how peaceful the bear has been so far." Sophia nodded, understanding the dilemma. "Where is he now?" "The tracking teams picked up his trail heading north into the backcountry. After he left the cemetery, he's moved about 15 miles into the wilderness as of dawn." Michael pulled up a map on his computer, indicating the bear's path. "Heading toward what we believe is his denning area for winter." "That gives us some time then," Sophia mused. "Bears in this region typically den by early November, especially with this early snow. Once he's settled for hibernation, we have months to figure out the right approach before spring." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying the wildlife biologist with newfound appreciation. When he'd first contacted the university, he'd expected a by-the-book scientist who would recommend standard management protocols, relocation at best, euthanasia at worst, for a bear so comfortable around humans. Instead, Dr. Chen seemed as determined as he was to understand this extraordinary situation, rather than simply resolve it through conventional means. "What did James Stevens tell you after I dropped you off at his cabin last night?" he asked. Sophia opened her notebook, flipping to a page filled with detailed notes. "He showed me all of Rebecca's journals documenting her encounters with Samson. It started about 5 years ago when she was photographing salmon runs in the North Valley. Unlike most bears who would flee when detecting human presence, this one seemed curious about her. Over time, a pattern developed. He would appear at her usual photography spots, maintain a respectful distance, but stay visible. And that's highly unusual behavior," Michael noted. "Extremely," Sophia agreed. "But Rebecca was unusual herself. According to James, she had an almost supernatural patience. She'd sit for hours, barely moving, until the animals around her essentially forgot she was there. Her journals document a gradual building of trust with this particular bear over nearly 2 years. She turned a page in her notebook. The most extraordinary entries come from the last months of her life. When she became too ill to venture into the backcountry, she'd sit on her cabin porch instead. 3 times during her final month, Samson appeared at the forest edge near her home, never approaching closely, never causing any damage, just watching." Michael shook his head in amazement. "And she never reported these visits? As a ranger, she would have known the protocols for bear sightings near residences." "She knew exactly what would happen if she reported it," Sophia replied softly. "The bear would be considered habituated to humans and dangerous. At minimum, relocated, possibly euthanized. She chose to protect him instead. The office door opened again, and Mayor Eleanor Blackwood entered without knocking, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Unlike the previous days, practical outdoor attire, today she wore the semi-formal clothes that reflected her official capacity, though she had still opted for snow boots given the conditions. "I've called an emergency town council meeting for noon," she announced. "The video from the cemetery has already spread throughout town. People are divided. Some are terrified at the idea of a grizzly visiting so close to town. Others are calling it a miracle. I need you both there to present the facts without emotional coloring." "Of course," Michael agreed, though he wondered if any facts could adequately explain what they had witnessed. "James Stevens will be there as well," Eleanor continued. "He's agreed to share Rebecca's documentation of her encounters with the bear. I'm hoping that understanding the history might help calm those who are afraid." "Has there been panic?" Sophia asked. Eleanor sighed, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "Not panic exactly, but this town has always had a complicated relationship with the wilderness that surrounds us. We depend on it for our livelihood through tourism. We respect its power, but we also fear it. A grizzly bear that appears to be visiting a human grave challenges everything we thought we understood about that relationship." "It challenges what science understands as well," Sophia admitted. "But that's precisely why this situation is so valuable. If we react with fear and eliminate the bear, we lose the opportunity to learn something profound about animal cognition and emotional capacity." Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. "You believe the bear is genuinely mourning Rebecca?" "I believe," Sophia replied carefully, "that this bear formed a bond with a specific human that transcended the usual boundaries between species. Whether we call that friendship, recognition, or something else, it represents a level of cognitive and emotional complexity in bears that science has barely begun to acknowledge." The mayor nodded slowly. "Well, you'll have a chance to make that case to the town council. Just be prepared for resistance. People feel safer with clear boundaries between the human and wild worlds. This situation blurs those lines in ways that make many uncomfortable." After Eleanor departed, Michael began gathering the materials they would need for the council meeting: video footage, tracking data, and his official reports from the previous year's visits by the bear. As they worked, Sophia's phone chimed with an incoming call. "It's James," she said, checking the screen. "He wants us to come to Rebecca's cabin right away. Says he's found something important in her journals." 30 minutes later, they pulled up to the Stevens cabin, the fresh snow creating an almost fairy tale-like scene. James met them on the porch, his expression intense with discovery. Inside, the large table had been cleared of the previous days. Coffee cups and was now covered with journals, photographs, and maps spread out in chronological order. "He spent all night going through everything," James explained, the dark circles under his eyes testifying to his sleepless dedication. Rebecca kept meticulous records of every encounter with Samson, including GPS coordinates. He pointed to a map where dozens of locations had been marked with dates spanning nearly 3 years. "What struck me was the pattern," he continued, indicating clusters of markers. "Their meetings weren't random. They occurred along specific game trails and near particular landmarks, almost like designated meeting spots." Sophia leaned over the map, her scientific curiosity fully engaged. This suggests a level of spatial memory and intentionality that's remarkable even for a grizzly. Bears are intelligent, but this kind of patterned behavior over years. "There's more," James said, picking up one of the journals and opening to a marked page. In her last entry, just 3 days before she died, Rebecca wrote about leaving something behind for Samson. "Listen to this. Left the package today at our first meeting place. I know winter is coming and he'll soon sleep, but perhaps next spring he'll find it. A goodbye, just in case. Some connections deserve closure, even those that cross the boundaries. We've created between species." Michael's brow furrowed. "She left something for the bear. What was it?" "She doesn't say specifically," James replied, turning the page. "But she mentions honey, dried berries, and something to remember me by. And here's the GPS location where she left it." He pointed to a spot on the map, deep in the wilderness about 12 miles from town. "What if that's what he's been looking for all these years? What if he comes to the grave because he's following her scent, trying to find what she left for him?" Sophia considered this possibility. Bears have an extraordinary sense of smell, and they can remember food caches for years. If she left something with her scent on it, along with food. "We need to find it," James said firmly. "Whatever my sister left, Samson has been searching for it for 3 years. He deserves to have it." Michael studied the map location, skeptically. "That's deep backcountry, and with this early snow it would be treacherous going. Plus, after 3 years, whatever she left is likely long gone, deteriorated or taken by other animals." "Maybe," James acknowledged, "but if there's even a chance it's still there, I have to try. I owe it to Rebecca, and to Samson." Sophia and Michael exchanged concerned glances. "The council meeting is at noon," Michael reminded him. "Your perspective would be valuable there, James. People need to understand the history between your sister and this bear." James hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to search for Rebecca's package and his responsibility to protect her legacy and, by extension, Samson, at the town meeting. "What if we do both?" Sophia suggested. "James, you attend the council meeting. Help them understand this isn't a story about a dangerous bear, but about an extraordinary connection. Meanwhile, Michael and I can check this location. We're experienced in backcountry navigation, and as a ranger, Michael knows the terrain." James looked between them, hope kindling in his exhausted eyes. "You'd do that?" Michael wanted to object. As a ranger, his priority should be attending the council meeting, presenting the facts, and following whatever management directive was decided upon. But he found himself nodding instead. "We'll need snowshoes and emergency gear, and we leave." A detailed route plan with the station. An hour later, the preparations were complete. James had departed for town to prepare for the council meeting, while Michael and Sophia stood at the trailhead that would lead them into the backcountry. Despite the bright sunshine, the temperature remained well below freezing, their breath forming small clouds with each exhalation. Their backpacks contained emergency supplies, satellite phones, and GPS devices to navigate to the coordinates Rebecca had recorded. "Last chance to reconsider," Michael said, as they adjusted their snowshoes. "This is at least a 6-hour round trip in these conditions, and we're chasing what might be nothing more than a wild goose chase." Sophia tightened her pack straps and offered a determined smile. "In my field, the most important discoveries often start as improbable theories. Whether we find anything or not, I think we owe it to Rebecca and this remarkable bear to try." With that, they began their journey, following a trail that quickly disappeared under the deep snow, relying instead on GPS coordinates and Michael's familiarity with the landscape. The forest around them was transformed into a winter wonderland, snow-laden branches creating tunnels of white that muffled all sound except the crunch of their snowshoes and their steadily increasing breaths as they climbed. Despite the physical exertion, Sophia found herself marveling at the pristine beauty surrounding them. Growing up in urban environments and then spending most of her professional life on university campuses, she had experienced wilderness primarily through research expeditions. But this was different. Not a scientific excursion, but a pilgrimage of sorts, following the path of a woman who had formed an impossible bond with one of nature's most powerful predators. "Rebecca must have been extraordinary," she commented, during a brief rest stop, 2 hours into their journey. To venture out here alone, to have the patience and presence to connect with wildlife at this level. Michael nodded, taking a sip from his water bottle. She was a legend among the local rangers, though few of us knew her well. She could track animals others couldn't even find signs of, had a way of moving through the forest that seemed to make her part of it rather than a visitor. James said they were orphaned young. "Car accident when they were teenagers," Michael confirmed. "Their parents were both naturalists, taught at the university during the academic year, and brought the kids here every summer. After they died, Rebecca convinced the courts to let her finish high school living with a local family rather than be separated from these mountains. James went to college, built a career in the city, but she never left, except for her own education. In wildlife biology and photography, they continued their trek, the terrain becoming steeper and more challenging. By early afternoon, they had traveled nearly 6 miles into the backcountry, the pristine snow broken only by the occasional track of winter wildlife, snowshoe hare, ermine, fox, and once the distinctive print of a mountain lion. The coordinates led them toward a small valley nestled between 2 ridges, where a frozen stream cut through stands of ancient pine and fir trees. "We're getting close," Michael announced, checking the GPS. "Should be just beyond that next stand of trees." As they emerged from the forest into a small clearing, Sophia immediately understood why Rebecca might have chosen this spot. It was a natural meadow, which in summer would be filled with wildflowers and berries. Even now, blanketed in snow, it held a serene beauty, perfectly framed by mountains on 3 sides and protected from harsh winds by the surrounding forest. According to James, this is where Rebecca first encountered Samson, Michael said, surveying the area. She was photographing spring wildflowers, looked up, and saw him watching her from across the meadow. Sophia tried to imagine the scene, a woman alone with her camera, coming face to face with one of North America's most powerful predators, and somehow finding the presence of mind to remain still, to observe rather than flee, to begin what would become an extraordinary relationship. The coordinates point to that large pine at the meadow's edge, Michael noted, indicating a massive tree whose lower branches had been trimmed away, likely by Rebecca to create a blind for wildlife photography. They approached carefully, searching for any sign of a cache or marker. The tree's massive trunk, at least 4 feet in diameter, was scarred by bear claw marks, not recent, but deep enough to have lasted years. Circling the tree, Michael suddenly stopped, pointing to a hollow. About 7 feet up, partially concealed by the angle of a large branch. There! That could be a natural cache spot. The hollow was too high to reach from the ground. After assessing the lower branches, Michael determined they were strong enough to support his weight and began to climb carefully. The snow made the bark slippery, but he managed to reach a position where he could peer into the hollow. "There's something in here," he called down, excitement evident in his voice, "wrapped in some kind of waterproof material." Carefully, he extracted a package about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in heavy-duty waterproof fabric and sealed with duct tape. Despite 3 years of exposure to the elements, the wrapping had protected whatever was inside from deterioration. He passed it down to Sophia before climbing back to the ground. They looked at the package in reverent silence, both feeling the weight of the moment. This was Rebecca Stevens's final message to the bear who had become her unlikely friend. Preserved. Against all odds in the wilderness she had loved. "Should we open it?" Michael asked uncertainly. Sophia hesitated. "It feels almost like invading their privacy, but we need to know what's inside to understand what's been driving Samson's behavior all these years." Carefully, she removed her gloves and began to unwrap the package, preserving the waterproof covering as much as possible. Inside, they found a small wooden box, lovingly crafted and sealed with beeswax around the edges to protect the contents. The lid was carved with a simple image of a bear and the name Samson burned into the wood. Opening the box revealed several compartments. The largest contained a glass jar of honey mixed with what appeared to be dried berries and nuts. Bear delicacies that had been preserved by the cold and careful packaging. Another held a small leather pouch identical to the one they had seen Samson uncover at the grave, and in a third compartment lay a sealed envelope with "For whoever finds this" written on the front in Rebecca's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Sophia opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside, holding it so Michael could read alongside her. "To whoever has found this, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has led you to this place that was special to me and a most remarkable friend. 5 years ago, in this meadow, I encountered a grizzly bear I came to call Samson. What began as a chance meeting evolved into something science might dismiss, but my heart knows to be true. A bond between species that defied explanation. Samson taught me that the boundaries we create between humans and the wild world are more permeable than we admit. He showed intelligence, curiosity, and what I can only describe as friendship, though biologists might scoff at the term. He appeared regularly at my photography sites, kept a respectful distance, and over time seemed to recognize me specifically as different from other humans he clearly avoided. In these last months, as cancer has limited my ability to visit our meeting places, he has come to the edge of my property 3 times, watching, waiting, perhaps wondering why I no longer venture into his world. I believe he senses my illness, in ways we don't understand. I've left this package in our first meeting place, containing things I know he values: honey, berries, and a small pouch with items carrying my scent. The small compass was my father's, carried on all our family. Wilderness trips. The bandana was mine, worn on countless photography expeditions. These things connect me to the places we both loved. If a human has found this first, likely a ranger, hiker, or perhaps my brother James, I ask a favor. Please leave the contents for Samson. He may never find it or may not connect it to me if he does, but I need to believe that even across the divide of species, and eventually death, some form of goodbye is possible. And if you're reading this because Samson's behavior has drawn attention, perhaps he's been searching for me in places humans inhabit, Please understand, he is not a threat. He's seeking a friend who disappeared. Whatever management decisions must be made, I beg you to err on the side of compassion for a creature who demonstrated that the capacity for connection extends beyond our human boundaries. With gratitude, Rebecca Stevens. When they finished reading, both stood in silence, the only sound the occasional soft plop of snow falling from branches in the windless afternoon. Sophia carefully refolded the letter, her scientific mind racing to integrate this deeply personal testimony with her understanding of animal behavior. "We need to repack this exactly as she left it," she said finally, "and then we need to help Samson find it." Michael stared at her. "Help him find it? How?" "I'm not sure yet," she admitted, "but that's what he's been searching for all these years, visiting her grave, trying to follow her scent, looking for what she left him." Rebecca understood something about this bear that science is only beginning to grasp, that the emotional lives of animals can be profoundly complex, especially for intelligent species like bears. As they carefully repackaged Rebecca's gift, preserving it exactly as she had prepared it, a plan began to form in Sophia's mind. It was unorthodox, possibly even career-threatening, but it honored both the scientific importance of this extraordinary situation and the deeply personal nature of the connection between a woman and the wild creature who remembered her even after death. "The town council meeting will be over by now," Michael noted, checking his watch. "We should head back if we want to make it before dark." Sophia nodded, but her thoughts were already racing ahead to what would come next. Convincing a skeptical town to allow a most unorthodox experiment, one that might help resolve a 3-year quest by a grieving bear and reveal new dimensions of animal cognition that could change our understanding of the creatures with whom we share the planet. As they began their return journey, the winter sun already sinking toward the mountains, she imagined Rebecca in this same meadow, camera in hand, looking up to find herself watched by curious eyes that would become an unlikely friend. Some boundaries, it seemed, existed primarily in the human mind, and occasionally the heart found ways to cross them that reason alone could never bridge. Behind them, the package waited once more in its hiding place, a message of love and farewell preserved against time and elements, waiting for the one it was meant for, a bear named Samson, who had demonstrated that grief, memory, and connection were not exclusively human domains, but part of a more universal language of the heart that transcended species. The journey back to Whispering Pines took longer than expected, the afternoon light fading quickly behind the mountains and forcing them to navigate the final miles by headlamp. When they finally emerged from the forest trail onto the plowed road where they had left Michael's truck, they were exhausted but driven by a sense of purpose that transcended physical discomfort. "The council meeting will be long over," Michael observed as they loaded their gear. "Let's head straight to the town hall and see what was decided." Whispering Pines after dark was a study in contrast, windows glowing warm against the snow-covered landscape, smoke rising from chimneys into a star-filled sky of impossible clarity. As they drove through town, Sophia noted groups of people still gathered outside the diner and general store, engaged in animated conversation that suggested the bear situation remained the primary topic of discussion. The town hall, a modest, 2-story building of local stone and timber, still showed lights burning on the main floor despite the late hour. Inside, they found Mayor Eleanor, James Stevens, and 3 other people whom Michael identified as council members, surrounded. by maps and documents spread across a large table. Eleanor looked up as they entered, relief evident on her face. "There you are. We were beginning to worry when you didn't return for the meeting." "We found it," Sophia announced without preamble. "Rebecca's package for Samson, exactly where she documented leaving it." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the wildlife biologist and ranger. James stepped forward, his expression a complex mixture of hope and trepidation. "What was in it?" Sophia described the contents, then handed him the letter, which he read silently, tears gathering in his eyes as he encountered his sister's final written words. When he finished, he passed it to Eleanor, who read it aloud for the benefit of the council members. "This changes things," one of the council members said when she finished. "If this bear has been searching for something specific left by Rebecca, it explains why traditional hazing methods haven't worked," Michael added. "Rangers tried using noise deterrents the first year he appeared at the cemetery, but he returned despite them. He's not a typical problem bear seeking food. He's following a scent trail and a memory." "The council vote was divided," Eleanor explained. 3-2 in favor of requesting state wildlife officials to relocate the bear, with a minority supporting more aggressive intervention given the proximity to town. But we hadn't received this information when the vote was taken. "We can't relocate him," James said firmly. "Not when we finally understand what he's been searching for. My sister left that package for him. He deserves to find it." The oldest council member, a man Michael had identified as Harold Fisher, the town's retired doctor, cleared his throat. "Young man, I sympathize with your position. This bear's connection to your sister is remarkable. But our primary responsibility is to the safety of this community. A grizzly regularly approaching town, regardless of its motivation, poses inherent risks. Not if we help the bear find what it's searching for," Sophia interjected. "I've been developing a plan on our walk back. It's unorthodox, but it might satisfy both the emotional aspect of this situation and the safety concerns." All eyes turned to her expectantly. "Samson has been following Rebecca's scent to the cemetery, but the trail ends there. What if we create a new scent trail leading from the grave to the meadow where she left his package? Bears have an extraordinary sense of smell and excellent spatial memory. If we can connect these 2 points for him, he might finally find what he's been searching for all these years." "And then what?" Harold asked skeptically. "Even if he finds this package, what guarantee do we have that he won't continue visiting the cemetery or approaching town?" "We don't," Sophia admitted honestly. "But based on Rebecca's documentation of his behavior and what we witnessed last night, this bear has demonstrated remarkable specificity in his actions. He's not a general nuisance bear. He's been on a very focused quest. Once that quest is complete, he may finally find closure." "Closure?" Harold repeated incredulously. "We're attributing human emotional processes to a wild animal now." "The scientific literature increasingly supports the existence of complex emotional lives in many mammals," Sophia responded firmly. "Elephants revisit the bones of deceased herd members for years. Orcas have been documented carrying dead calves for weeks. Primates show clear signs of grief. While we must be careful about anthropomorphizing, we should be equally careful not to dismiss animal emotions simply because they challenge our notion of human uniqueness." A thoughtful silence fell over the room as the council members considered her words. Finally, Eleanor spoke. What exactly would this plan involve, Dr. Chen? Sophia outlined her proposal. They would create a scent trail using items from Rebecca's personal effects, leading from the cemetery to the meadow where the package was hidden. They would monitor both locations with cameras, but keep human presence to a minimum. If Samson followed the trail and found the package, they would document his behavior and then determine next steps based on what occurred. It's worth noting, Michael added, that Samson will likely enter hibernation within the next 2 weeks, given the early snow and dropping temperatures. That gives us a narrow window to attempt this, but also means that regardless of the outcome, he'll be dormant for the next 5 months, posing no risk to the community during that time. The council members exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years working together. Finally, Harold spoke again. "I move we suspend the previous vote and allow this experiment to proceed under strict monitoring conditions. If at any point the bear shows aggression or unpredictable behavior, standard management protocols will immediately take effect." "Seconded," said a younger council member who had remained silent until now. "All in favor?" Eleanor asked. The chair's vote was unanimous. As the meeting concluded and people began gathering their materials, James approached Sophia. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing in what Rebecca knew about Samson, for being willing to see this as more than just a wildlife management problem." Sophia smiled tiredly. "Science advances when we're willing to consider possibilities beyond our current understanding. Your sister seemed to grasp something about animal cognition and emotion that researchers are only beginning to explore. Whether or not our plan works, documenting this situation will be valuable for advancing that understanding." "It's more than science for me," James admitted. "It's about honoring Rebecca's connection to these mountains and the creatures she loved, and giving Samson the goodbye she wanted him to have." As they left the town hall and stepped into the crystal-clear night, stars blazing overhead in the pollutant-free mountain sky, Sophia found herself reflecting on the extraordinary situation she had stumbled into. What had begun as a routine consultation on unusual bear behavior had evolved into something that challenged not just scientific understanding, but the very boundaries humans constructed between themselves and the wild world. Tomorrow, they would begin implementing their unorthodox plan, creating a pathway for a grieving bear to find the farewell gift left by a woman who had recognized him as more than just a wild creature to be observed from a distance. Whether it succeeded or failed, the attempt itself represented a rare moment when science, emotion, and respect for the mysteries of the natural world aligned in perfect balance. In the silent, snow-covered town of Whispering Pines, where the boundary between wilderness and civilization had always been more permeable than in most places, a new understanding was taking shape, one that acknowledged the complex emotional lives of our fellow creatures and the unexpected connections that occasionally formed across the species divide, persisting even beyond death itself. The dawn broke clear and brilliant over Whispering Pines, the rising sun transforming the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle of light and shadow. At Rebecca Stevens's cabin, an unlikely team gathered to implement their unprecedented plan. James had arrived with several boxes of his sister's belongings, clothing she had worn in the field, the backpack she carried on photography expeditions, even the hat that had protected her from summer sun and winter cold during countless Hours observing wildlife. Rebecca kept detailed records of every meeting with Samson, he explained, spreading a map across the table where Sophia, Michael, and Mayor Eleanor sat nursing steaming mugs of coffee. Each encounter, the weather conditions, his behavior, everything. I've been correlating them with her scent trail theory. Sophia leaned forward with interest. Scent trail theory? For the next hour, they tracked Samson's deliberate progress from one camera to the next. At each scent marker, he paused, thoroughly investigating the item carrying Rebecca's scent, sometimes gently touching it with his massive paw or pressing his nose against it before continuing along the trail. His behavior showed none of the random wandering typical of bears foraging at night. This was focused, intentional movement toward a specific goal. By 2 a.m., he had reached the forest edge where their established trail left town and entered the wilderness. Here, the cameras were spaced farther apart, creating temporary blind spots in their monitoring. Tension filled the room during these gaps, only to break into relieved excitement when Samson would appear at the next camera, still following their carefully laid path. "I can't believe this is working," Michael said, the ranger's usual pragmatism giving way to wonder. "He's tracking a scent trail we created over 12 miles of difficult terrain in winter conditions with perfect precision." Bears have evolved to follow scent over enormous distances, Sophia reminded him. They can track food sources across dozens of miles. What's extraordinary here isn't his physical capability, but his motivation. He's not seeking food or a mate, the usual drivers of such determined tracking behavior. "He's seeking connection," James said softly. "The same thing we all seek when we lose someone we love, some tangible link to them, some proof they existed and mattered to us." The night deepened as Samson's journey continued. Outside, clouds had begun to gather, obscuring the stars and threatening more snow by morning. Inside the ranger station, no one suggested taking breaks or sleeping in shifts anymore. They were all fully invested in witnessing this remarkable journey to its conclusion. At 4:17 a.m., Camera 12 activated, the final monitoring point overlooking the meadow where Rebecca had hidden her package. Samson emerged from the forest edge, his massive form silhouetted against the snow-covered clearing. He paused, as he had at each previous marker, surveying the open space before him with what almost appeared to be recognition. "This is where Rebecca first encountered him," James reminded them unnecessarily, his voice tight with emotion. "Where their connection began." With deliberate steps, Samson crossed the meadow toward the ancient pine tree where the package waited. The final camera, positioned for an unobstructed view of the cache site, captured his approach in perfect detail. He circled the tree once, twice, his nose following the concentrated scent of Rebecca's vest hanging on the lower branch. Then, with surprising grace for such a massive creature, he rose onto his hind legs, reaching nearly 9 feet tall as he investigated the tree's trunk. "The hollow where we found the package is just above his head," Michael noted. "If he remembers this as a meeting place with Rebecca, he might recognize it as a potential cache site." As if hearing the ranger's words, Samson dropped back to all fours and began a more thorough examination of the tree's base, where snow had accumulated against the trunk. With methodical movements, he began to clear the area, powerful paws sweeping snow aside to expose the earth beneath. This behavior mirrored what they had observed at the cemetery. Not frantic digging, but careful, almost delicate investigation of a specific site. "He's searching," Dr. Wong observed. But does he know what he's searching for? The answer came moments later when Samson suddenly froze, his attention fixed on something at the tree's base. The camera angle made it difficult to see exactly what had caught his interest, but his behavior changed dramatically, body tensing, head lowering for a closer investigation. "The scent is strongest there," Sophia explained. "When we replaced the package, some of the honey mixture may have seeped into the soil, creating a concentrated scent target." With renewed purpose, Samson began to dig more deliberately. No longer simply clearing snow, but excavating the frozen ground itself. His powerful claws made short work of the task, and within minutes he had created a sizable depression at the tree's base. Then, abruptly, he stopped digging and sat back, head tilted in what appeared to be confusion. "He's found where the scent is coming from, but the package is up in the hollow, not buried at the base," Michael realized. For several minutes, Samson remained motionless, seemingly processing this contradiction. Then, in a movement that drew gasps from everyone watching, he rose again on his hind legs and reached higher on the trunk, massive paws exploring the bark, until they encountered the hollow opening 7 feet above ground level. "He remembers," James whispered. "He knows there's something in the tree." With surprising dexterity, Samson extended one paw into the hollow, feeling inside the cavity. The minutes stretched unbearably as he investigated, his massive body stretched to its full height against the ancient pine. Then, with a deliberate movement, he withdrew his paw, now holding something they couldn't quite make out in the camera's night vision mode. "Can we zoom in?" Sophia asked urgently. Marco adjusted the camera controls, bringing the image into sharper focus. In Samson's paw, now clearly visible, was Rebecca's carefully wrapped package, the waterproof covering still intact after 3 years in its hiding place. With the package secured, Samson lowered himself to all fours, placing his prize carefully on the snow before him. What followed was a display of gentleness that seemed incongruous, coming from one of nature's most powerful predators. Using his claws with surgical precision, he began to unwrap the waterproof covering, gradually exposing the wooden box within. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," Dr. Wong murmured, her scientific objectivity momentarily abandoned in the face of such extraordinary behavior. This level of deliberate tool-like manipulation in a wild bear. The wooden box presented a greater challenge than the outer wrapping. Samson investigated it thoroughly, nosing each side, attempting to pry at the edges with his claws. The honey and berries inside, preserved in their glass jar, clearly attracted his attention. His movements became more determined, though still remarkably controlled. After several attempts to open the box gently, his patience apparently reached its limit. With one powerful swipe, he broke the wooden lid, exposing the compartments within. Immediately his attention fixed on the honey jar, which he carefully extracted and placed aside. But rather than consuming this treat immediately, as would be expected of a bear, he continued exploring the box's contents. "He's looking for something else," James said, his voice catching. "Not just the food." As they watched in amazement, Samson located the small leather pouch among the broken pieces of the box. He sniffed it thoroughly, then gently nudged it open with his nose. From within, something small fell onto the snow, the compass that had belonged to Rebecca's father, along with the bandana she had worn on countless expeditions in these mountains. What happened next would challenge everything they thought they understood about the emotional capacity of wild animals. Samson picked up the bandana in his mouth, then settled onto his haunches in the snow. For long minutes, he simply sat there. The cloth held gently between his massive jaws, occasionally pressing his nose against it as if inhaling the scent it carried. The silence in the monitoring room was absolute, broken only by a soft sound from James that might have been a suppressed sob. They were witnessing something that defied explanation within conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. A massive predator cradling a memento of a human friend who had passed beyond his reach, engaged in what could only be described as a moment of remembrance. Finally, Samson placed the bandana carefully beside the honey jar. Only then did he turn his attention to the food Rebecca had left him, breaking the glass with a precise blow from one paw and licking the sweet mixture. When the jar was empty, he gathered both it and the bandana, along with the compass, and carried them to the base of the pine tree. There, in a behavior that left even the scientists speechless, he arranged these items in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern before covering them with snow, creating a small mound that he patted into place with his paws. "He's caching them," Dr. Wong whispered. "Bears cache food for future retrieval, but this isn't about food," James finished. "He's preserving her scent, her memory." For nearly an hour after completing his cache, Samson remained in the meadow, sometimes pacing its perimeter, sometimes sitting motionless beside the tree where Rebecca had left her final gift. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with the first pale light of morning, he finally turned toward the forest. At the meadow's edge, he paused, looking back at the tree one last time before disappearing into the wilderness. In the monitoring room, no one spoke for several minutes after the bear had gone. The emotional weight of what they had witnessed settled over them, a glimpse into a world where the boundaries between species blurred, where connection and memory might transcend, the limitations of language and even death itself. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "We should go there, document the site, retrieve the camera data, understand exactly what happened." Michael nodded, already reaching for his coat. "I'll get the snowmobiles ready." Within the hour, they had assembled a small expedition. Michael, Sophia, James, and Dr. Wong, leaving Marco and Eleanor to continue monitoring the cameras in case Samson returned. The journey to the meadow took less time than their trail-laying expedition of the previous day, but each mile seemed to carry them deeper into a mystery that challenged their understanding of the natural world. When they arrived at the meadow, the morning sun had cleared the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the untouched snow. Samson's tracks were clearly visible, leading from the forest edge to the ancient pine and back again. At the tree's base, they found exactly what the cameras had shown, a carefully constructed mound where the bear had cached Rebecca's gifts along with the empty honey jar. James knelt beside the cache, brushing away just enough snow to confirm its contents without disturbing the arrangement. The bandana, compass, and jar were positioned in what could not be dismissed as random placement. The compass in the center, the bandana folded beneath it, the jar positioned to protect both from the elements. "Should we take them?" he asked, softly, looking to Sophia for guidance. She shook her head. "No. They're his now. Rebecca left them for him, and he's chosen to preserve them rather than destroy or abandon them. That choice should be respected." Dr. Wong had been examining the tracks and disturbed areas around the tree with a scientist's precise attention. "Based on the behavioral patterns documented here, I believe Samson has completed his search. The concentrated focus on Rebecca's grave over 3 years suggests he was following her scent trail, seeking something specific. Now that he's found it, my prediction is that he'll no longer visit the cemetery. "You think he's found closure?" Michael asked, the practical ranger still struggling to attribute such complex emotional processing to a wild animal. "I think," Dr. Wong replied carefully, "that whatever drive compelled him to return to her grave night after night has been satisfied. Whether we call that closure, completion, or simply the fulfillment of a powerful instinctual urge is perhaps less important than recognizing that animals experience the world with greater emotional complexity than we've traditionally acknowledged." James had moved to stand beneath the ancient pine, gazing up at the hollow where his sister had hidden her final message to her unlikely friend. "Rebecca always said we underestimate them, all the creatures we share this planet with. She believed they understood more, felt more, remembered more than science gave them credit for." His voice caught. She was right. As they prepared to depart, Sophia paused for one final look at the meadow, committing to memory this place where something extraordinary had transpired, not just Rebecca's initial encounters with Samson years earlier, but this culmination of a 3-year journey that defied conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. Whatever science might eventually conclude about this remarkable case study, one thing seemed undeniable: the capacity for connection extended beyond the human realm, and sometimes, in the rarest of circumstances, it could bridge even the divide between species. The snowmobile's engines broke the morning stillness as they departed, leaving behind only their tracks, alongside those of the bear who had finally found what he had been searching for. Above, the winter sky stretched endlessly blue, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath it, yet somehow bearing witness to them all. The struggles, the connections, the moments of grace that occasionally illuminated the wilderness of existence. In Whispering Pines, the story of Rebecca Stevens and her bear would become legend, passing from generation to generation as a reminder that the boundaries between the human and wild worlds were perhaps more permeable than anyone had imagined. Children would grow up hearing about the photographer who spoke the language of wild things, and the massive grizzly who remembered her even after death. Some would dismiss it as mere folklore, embellished over time. Others would recognize in it a profound truth about the capacity for connection that existed in all living things. For the scientific community, the documented case study would spark debate, challenge established paradigms, and inspire new research into animal cognition and emotional processing. Papers would be published, conferences held, theories advanced and contested. But for those who had witnessed Samson's journey firsthand, no academic discourse could fully capture the simple truth they had observed. Love, in its purest form, recognized no boundaries, not species, not language, not even the final separation of death. As for Samson himself, tracking teams would confirm Dr. Wong's prediction. The massive grizzly never again approached the cemetery or the town of Whispering Pines. With the arrival of deep winter, he entered hibernation in a den high in the mountains, sleeping away the cold months as bears had done for millennia. When spring came and he emerged, his ranging patterns showed a new territory that included the meadow where Rebecca's gifts were cached, a place he would visit regularly in the years that followed, maintaining his own form of memorial to a connection that had transcended the expected boundaries of his world. And on summer evenings, when visitors to Whispering Pines asked about the unusual bronze statue in the town square, a woman with a camera kneeling beside a massive bear, locals would share the extraordinary story of Rebecca Stevens and Samson, a tale not just of interspecies connection, but of the unexpected ways grief and love could manifest. Even in the wild heart of a creature science had long considered incapable of such complexity. In this remote mountain town, where wilderness pressed close against civilization, the memorial stood as a reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons about humanity came from those who were not human at all, wild creatures whose lives intersected with our own in ways that challenged our understanding of the natural world and our place within it. Rebecca had seen this truth clearly, recognizing in Samson's intelligent eyes a kindred spirit worthy of respect and capable of connection. In the end, that recognition had created something remarkable, a bond that neither death nor the vast differences between their species could fully sever. And in this, perhaps, lay the most powerful lesson of all, that in a world often defined by boundaries and separations, the capacity for connection remained one of life's most profound mysteries and most precious gifts, transcending barriers, both seen and unseen, to remind us of our shared existence on this remarkable planet we all called home. 5 years had passed since that first winter when a grieving bear's visits to a grave had changed everything in Whispering Pines. The mountain community had transformed from a struggling outpost to an internationally recognized center for wildlife. Research, drawing scientists and conservation advocates from around the world. What began as a mystery had blossomed into a movement that was transforming humanity's relationship with the natural world. Autumn painted the landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as Sophia Chen stood at the edge of the meadow that had become sacred ground. The ancient pine tree, Samson's memorial site, stood tall against the azure sky, its branches swaying gently in the mountain breeze. At 53, Sophia's dark hair now showed elegant streaks of silver, but her eyes remained bright with the same curiosity and wonder that had guided her through this extraordinary journey. "Ready?" James Stevens asked, joining her at the meadow's edge. The years had been kind to him as well. The grief that once shadowed his features had transformed into purpose, giving him a quiet strength that commanded respect among researchers and conservationists alike. "As ready as one can be for something like this," Sophia replied, adjusting the specialized camera equipment she carried. "The satellite tracking confirms he's been in this area for the past 3 days. If patterns hold, he'll visit the cache site today or tomorrow." This would likely be their final opportunity to document Samson in his established territory. At 17 years old, remarkably advanced for a wild grizzly, he had begun showing signs of age. Their non-invasive monitoring had tracked declining mobility over the past year, and his ranging patterns had contracted significantly. Nature's cycle was unfolding, as it had for millennia, but with one bear's life so thoroughly documented, his approaching end carried special significance. "The observation team is already in position," James noted, gesturing toward the camouflage structures that housed their most advanced monitoring equipment. Dr. Patel arrived from Harvard last night. The Japanese research delegation will join us tomorrow. What had begun as a local anomaly had evolved into the world's most comprehensive study of ursine cognition and emotional behavior. The Ursine Cognitive Research Initiative now maintained 17 dedicated monitoring stations throughout North America, documenting previously unrecognized behaviors in bear populations from Alaska to the Appalachians. Their findings had revolutionized wildlife management policies and transformed public perception of these magnificent animals. As they made their way toward the primary observation blind, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The documentary, created 5 years earlier, had reached millions worldwide, winning prestigious awards and catalyzing a fundamental shift in how people viewed the emotional lives of wild animals. More significantly, it had inspired a generation of young researchers to approach wildlife studies with new frameworks that didn't dismiss the possibility of complex inner experiences in non-human species. Inside the blind, advanced monitoring equipment tracked environmental conditions and animal movements throughout the meadow and surrounding forest. Dr. Leila Patel, once a skeptical visitor, now the initiative's co-director, greeted them with the quiet intensity that had become her trademark. Morning readings show he's approximately 3 kilometers northeast, moving slowly but steadily in this direction, she reported, indicating heat signature tracking on one of the displays. Estimated arrival within 2 hours if he maintains current pace and direction. Their ability to monitor Samson had evolved dramatically over the years. The original camera traps and basic tracking techniques had given way to sophisticated systems that could detect and identify individual bears from kilometers away, analyze movement patterns for signs of health or distress, and predict behavioral responses based on accumulated data, all without disturbing the animals or altering their natural behaviors. "Any signs of his companion?" James asked, referring to the female bear, now designated F-27 in research documentation, but affectionately nicknamed Autumn by the team, who had become Samson's most frequent visitor at the cache site. "She's been ranging further south for the past week," Leila replied, "but satellite tracking showed movement in this direction overnight. It's possible they may converge here." The social dynamics they had documented between Samson and other bears, particularly Autumn, had challenged fundamental assumptions about these supposedly solitary animals. While not forming permanent groups like wolves or other pack animals, the bears had demonstrated complex networks of association, recognition, and what could only be described as social memory transmission. Samson's cache site had become a focal point for these interactions, a place where bears would gather not for food or mating, but for what appeared to be social connection and information exchange. As the morning progressed, monitoring systems tracked Samson's steady approach. His movement pattern was deliberate and purposeful. Not the ranging search behavior typical of foraging bears, but the direct path of an animal with a specific destination in mind. This targeted movement was consistent with what they had documented throughout the years. Visits to the cache site were intentional journeys, not random encounters during normal territory patrol. "Movement registered at the Northeast Sensor Array," announced Marco, one of the graduate students monitoring the perimeter detection system. "Visual confirmation through camera 14. On the main display, footage appeared showing Samson emerging from the forest edge into a small clearing about 1/2 kilometer from their position. Even at this distance, his distinctive features were recognizable. The scar across his muzzle, the silver grizzling around his face that had increased with age, the slight favoring of his right foreleg that had developed in recent years. "He's moving slower than last documentation," Layla observed, making notes on her tablet, "but his path remains direct and purposeful." They watched in respectful silence as the bear made his way steadily toward the meadow. Years of research had only deepened their appreciation for the extraordinary being they had been privileged to study. Samson had transformed scientific understanding not through laboratory tests or controlled experiments, but simply by being himself, by demonstrating capacities for memory, attachment, and social communication that science had previously failed to recognize in his kind. "Movement at the western perimeter," Marco announced suddenly. "Second bear approaching." The secondary display activated, showing footage from the western camera array. Autumn was approaching from the opposite direction, her own path similarly directed toward the cache site. At 7 years old, she was in her prime, healthy, strong, and demonstrating the same unusual behavioral patterns that had first brought Samson to their attention. "This is remarkable," Sophia murmured. "They haven't been documented traveling together, yet they're converging on the cache site simultaneously from different directions, almost as if they arranged to meet," James finished quietly. The implication was extraordinary. While their research had documented social learning and memory transmission, coordinated meeting behavior would suggest a level of communication and planning beyond anything previously attributed to bears. The scientists exchanged glances, recognizing the significance of what they might be witnessing. As both bears approached the meadow from different directions, the research team maintained absolute silence, recording every aspect of the unfolding interaction. This was why they had developed non-invasive monitoring technologies to observe without influencing, to document natural behaviors without human presence altering the dynamics. Samson reached the meadow first, emerging from the forest with the careful deliberation of an aging predator. Despite his years, he remained an impressive figure, massive shoulders rolling with each step, head held high as he surveyed his surroundings. He moved directly to the ancient pine tree, his path unwavering across the open ground. At the cache site, he began the ritual they had documented countless times, carefully clearing debris from the area, then digging with precise movements to uncover the items buried beneath. After 17 years exposed to the elements, Rebecca's original gifts had naturally deteriorated, but Samson had maintained the cache, periodically replacing the bandana and other fabric items with objects he had collected himself. Pieces of clothing found or taken from remote cabins, scraps of material that carried human scent. The significance of this behavior had sparked intense academic debate. Some researchers argued it represented simple scent association, the bear maintaining a collection of items that triggered positive memory through olfactory stimulation. Others, including Sophia, saw something more profound, a deliberate act of memorial maintenance, a physical manifestation of memory that transcended instinctual behavior. As Samson completed uncovering the cache, Autumn emerged from the western forest edge. Unlike in their earlier encounters years ago, where she had approached cautiously and maintained submissive posture, she now moved with confidence, acknowledging Samson's presence, but showing no fear or deference. Their relationship had evolved over time into something resembling companionship, not the typical male-female interactions driven by mating imperatives, but a social bond that persisted through seasons and years. They've developed a relationship structure outside typical ursine social parameters. Layla observed softly. Neither mating-focused nor parent-offspring, but a persistent social connection centered around this specific location. The interaction that followed demonstrated the complexity of this relationship. Autumn joined Samson at the cache site, and together they engaged in what the research team had come to call object-sharing ritual. Both bears investigating the collected items, sometimes passing them between them, often sitting in companionable proximity while holding or examining the objects. For nearly an hour, the researchers documented this extraordinary behavior, capturing detailed footage that would further expand scientific understanding of bear cognition and social dynamics. What they were witnessing defied traditional categorization, neither typical foraging, territorial nor reproductive behavior, but something that more closely resembled cultural practice, the sharing of significant objects and locations in ways that transmitted meaning between individuals. As the bears completed their investigation of the cache, Samson did something they had never previously documented. Instead of reburying the items, as he had always done before, he carefully arranged them on the ground between himself and Autumn. Then, with deliberate movements, he selected the most recent addition to the collection, a blue fabric bandana similar to Rebecca's original, and nudged it toward the female bear. "He's giving it to her," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years, he's transferring a piece of the memorial to her." In stunned silence, they watched as Autumn accepted the item, sniffing it thoroughly before picking it up in her mouth. What followed seemed ceremonial. Both bears rose and circled the cache site together. Autumn carrying the bandana, Samson watching attentively. Then, to the researchers' astonishment, they began moving together toward the forest edge, leaving the other cache items exposed rather than reburied, as had been Samson's invariable practice for 17 years. "They're leaving together," Layla noted with professional calm that barely concealed her excitement. "And they're leaving the cache open. This represents a significant behavior change." "Not a change," Sophia corrected quietly. "A transition, a passing of responsibility." The implication settled over the observation blind like a mantle of profound understanding. Samson, in his advanced years, appeared to be transferring custodianship of the memorial site, and by extension the memory of Rebecca, to the younger bear who had shared this significant location with him over time. It suggested not just memory and attachment, but forward thinking, planning for the continuation of something meaningful beyond his own lifespan. As the bears disappeared into the forest together, Sophia found herself blinking back unexpected tears. After decades in wildlife research, maintaining professional distance had become second nature. But some moments transcended scientific objectivity. This was not merely interesting animal behavior, it was a glimpse into the depths of connection that could exist between supposedly different consciousnesses, bear to human, bear to bear, past to future. "I need to document this immediately," Layla announced, already typing rapidly into the research database. "The implications for our understanding of cultural transmission in non-human species are extraordinary." While the scientific team busied themselves with technical documentation, Sophia stepped outside the blind, needing a moment to process what they had witnessed on a more personal level. James joined her, his own expression suggesting similar emotional impact. "She would have loved this," he said simply, gazing toward the cache site now visible across the meadow. "Rebecca always said they understood more than we gave them credit for." "She was right," Sophia agreed, about so many things. They stood in companionable silence, watching as afternoon light gilded the meadow in golden hues. What had begun as a mystery, a bear's grief bringing him repeatedly to a human grave, had blossomed into a decades-long journey of discovery that had transformed scientific understanding and public perception. But beyond the research papers, beyond the policy changes and conservation initiatives, lay something more profound, a recognition of connection that transcended the boundaries humans had constructed between themselves and the natural world. "We should check the cache site," James suggested after several minutes. "Document any changes before disturbing the area." Together they crossed the meadow, approaching the ancient pine with the reverence appropriate to a place of such significance. The cache itself lay open, as the bears had left it, the collection of items Samson had maintained over the years, now exposed to the mountain air. Some were recognizably human-made, scraps of fabric, a weathered compass, similar to the original, small metal objects that caught the light. Others were natural items that had taken on significance through context, unusually shaped pine cones, smooth river stones, a hawk feather. "A collection of meaningful objects," Sophia observed, photographing the arrangement without disturbing it. "Not random treasures like a magpie might gather, but items specifically connected to this location and its history." "Should we rebury them?" James asked. "Maintain the cache as Samson has all these years?" Sophia considered the question thoughtfully. "No," she decided finally. He chose to leave it open, to pass an element to Autumn rather than maintain it himself. "I think we honor that choice by documenting but not interfering." As they completed, in their non-invasive documentation of the site, Sophia's radio crackled with an incoming message from the monitoring station. "Movement update," came Marco's voice. "The pair has continued traveling together, heading north toward the high country. Samson appears to be leading, Autumn following with the transferred item still in her possession." This development added another layer to the already extraordinary behavior they had witnessed. Rather than separating after the cache site interaction, as had been the pattern in previous encounters, the bears were continuing their journey together, suggesting a sustained social bond that extended beyond the specific location of the memorial. "We should return to base and coordinate extended monitoring," Sophia decided. "This represents a significant behavioral shift that we need to document comprehensively." Back at the research center, the team gathered to analyze the day's observations and plan continued monitoring strategies. The implications of what they had witnessed extended far beyond a single remarkable interaction between two bears. It suggested cognitive and social capacities that challenged fundamental assumptions about non-human consciousness. As evening approached, bringing cooler air down from the mountains, Sophia stepped onto the porch of the original cabin, maintained as both historical site and personal retreat amidst the expanded research facilities. The vista before her stretched to distant peaks now touched with early snow, valleys ablaze with autumn colors, forests where countless lives unfolded according to rhythms deeper than human comprehension. Michael Hawkins, the ranger who had been with them since those first uncertain days, joined her with 2 steaming mugs of tea. Now, the regional conservation director, he had helped implement the policy changes inspired by their research, transforming wildlife management practices throughout the northern Rockies. "Heard about today's observation," he said, handing her one of the mugs. "Quite something." Beyond anything we could have imagined when this started, Sophia agreed. And yet, in another way, exactly what Rebecca seemed to understand intuitively, that these animals have inner lives as rich and complex as our own, just differently expressed. They sipped their tea in companionable silence, watching as the setting sun painted the mountains in deepening shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, an aging bear and his younger companion were traveling together, carrying a fragment of shared history between them. What meaning they attached to this journey, what communication passed between them, humans could never fully know. But the recognition that such meaning and communication existed had transformed how people saw these magnificent creatures. The governor's office called, Michael mentioned after a while. The wildlife corridor legislation passed unanimously. 8 million acres of connected habitat permanently protected, with management protocols based directly on our research findings. Sophia smiled, feeling the significance of this achievement. A living memorial, then? Not just bronze statues and research papers, but actual landscape where bears and other wildlife can live according to their nature. Understood more clearly because of what Samson taught us. The legislation represented the culmination of years of advocacy built upon their research findings. By demonstrating the complex cognitive and emotional lives of these animals, they had changed public perception from seeing large predators as dangerous nuisances to recognizing them as essential, sentient members of healthy ecosystems worthy of protection and respect. As darkness gathered over the mountains, lights began appearing in the research center buildings and the town beyond. Whispering Pines had been transformed as well, from a struggling community on the edge of wilderness to a thriving center for conservation education that drew visitors from around the world. The town had embraced its unique story, finding economic revival through respectful engagement with the natural world rather than exploitation. "There's a town council meeting tonight," Michael reminded her. "They're finalizing plans for the new education center. Your input would be valued." The Rebecca Stevens Center for Wildlife Understanding would serve as both research facility and public education space, designed to bring the lessons of their work to broader audiences. Unlike traditional natural history museums with their static displays, this innovative center would use advanced technology to create immersive experiences that helped visitors understand the world from animal perspectives, to see as bears see, to recognize the rich sensory and emotional landscapes that shape their lives. "I'll be there," Sophia assured him. "This has always been about more than scientific discovery. It's about changing how humans see their relationship with the natural world." Later that evening, as community members gathered to finalize plans for the new center, Sophia found herself studying the crowd with appreciation. What had begun as a scientific investigation had blossomed into a community transformation. Local schoolchildren now grew up understanding the complex lives of the animals that shared their mountain home. Businesses had developed around sustainable wildlife tourism rather than exploitation. Artists, writers, and filmmakers had found inspiration in the extraordinary story that had unfolded in their small town. Mayor Eleanor Blackwood, now in her 70s but still sharp as mountain air, called the meeting to order. "Before we discuss the education center plans, I'd like to acknowledge the events documented today at the memorial site. Dr. Chen, perhaps you could share what you observed with those who haven't heard." Sophia described the extraordinary interaction they had witnessed: Samson's transfer of the memorial item to Autumn, their departure together, the apparent passing of custodianship from one generation to the next. As she spoke, she noticed the rapt attention of the youngest audience members, children who had grown up with this story as part of their community identity, who had never known a world where bears were seen as mindless creatures driven purely by instinct. "What does it mean?" asked a young girl of perhaps 10, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "That he gave the bandana to the other bear?" Sophia considered how to answer, recognizing the importance of honesty even with complex questions. From a scientific perspective, it suggests cognitive capabilities we're still working to understand. The concept of legacy, of passing significant objects or locations to others who will maintain them. But from a more personal perspective, she paused, finding the right words. "I believe it means that connections matter, even across the boundaries we think separate us. Species from species, human from wild, present from past. That remembrance can be shared, passed forward, kept alive through relationship." The child nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Around the room, Sophia saw nodding heads and thoughtful expressions. A community that had journeyed with this extraordinary story, that had been transformed by its unfolding meaning. As the meeting progressed to practical discussions of building designs and educational programming, Sophia found her thoughts returning to the meadow, to the ancient pine tree, to the open cache, now exposed to mountain air after years of careful burial. Whatever happened in the coming days and years, whether Autumn maintained the memorial in her own way, whether the connection to Rebecca's memory continued or transformed into something new, the impact of what had begun there would continue, rippling outward, changing how humans understood their relationship with the natural world. Later that night, after the meeting concluded and town residents had dispersed to their homes, Sophia returned to the original cabin that had been Rebecca's home. Though the research center now included modern facilities with advanced technology, she still preferred to stay in this simple structure when visiting, feeling connected to the origins of their extraordinary journey. James was already there, sitting on the porch with a small fire burning in the outdoor pit, providing warmth against the mountain night chill. The stars overhead blazed with impossible clarity, unpolluted by artificial light, a tapestry of cosmic wonder that had witnessed the unfolding of life on Earth long before humans arrived to name the constellations. "I've been thinking about time," he said as she joined him by the fire, "about how differently we experience it from other creatures. For us, 17 years is a significant portion of a lifetime. For a bear, it's most of their existence. For this mountain." He gestured toward the dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. "It's not even a blink." Yet connections form across those different timescales, Sophia observed. Rebecca's brief time with Samson created something that outlasted her physical presence, that continues influencing lives, human and non-human, to this day. They sat in companionable silence, watching flames dance and sparks rise toward the star-filled heavens. After all the years working together, words were often unnecessary between them, understanding flowing through shared experience and mutual respect. "What do you think happens now?" James asked finally. "With Samson aging, with this apparent transfer of the memorial to Autumn?" Sophia considered the question carefully. Scientifically speaking, we'll continue monitoring both bears, documenting any further interactions at the cache site, analyzing what this behavior reveals about ursine cognition and social structures. "And beyond science?" he prompted gently. "Beyond science." She paused, gazing into the fire. "I believe we're witnessing the natural unfolding of connection." Rebecca recognized something in Samson that transcended the boundaries we create between species. That recognition created a bond that persisted beyond her death, that Samson maintained through years of returning to significant places associated with her. Now he appears to be ensuring that this connection, whatever meaning it holds for him, continues beyond his own life through relationship with another bear. "A legacy," James murmured. "Yes. And perhaps that's the most profound lesson in all of this, that the capacity for meaningful connection, for remembrance, for carrying forward what matters, exists not just in humans, but in the wider community of life. That when we truly see other beings and allow ourselves to be seen in return, something precious emerges that transcends our differences and our individual mortality." As night deepened around them and the fire burned low, they continued their quiet conversation, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here and the unknown path that lay ahead. Whatever the coming days might bring, whether Samson returned to the cache site or passed peacefully into the great mystery, whether Autumn maintained the memorial in her own way or created new patterns of remembrance, the story that had begun with a bear's grief had transformed into something luminous and enduring. In the morning, Sophia would return to the research center, would analyze data and prepare reports, would continue the methodical scientific work that had revolutionized humanity's understanding of animal cognition. But for now, beneath the vast canopy of stars that had witnessed the unfolding of life on Earth since its beginnings, she allowed herself to simply appreciate the mystery at the heart of their work. The recognition that love, in its purest form, might transcend all the boundaries humans constructed to separate themselves from the wider community of life. And in that recognition lay hope, not just for better scientific understanding or more effective conservation strategies, but for a fundamental transformation in how humans perceived their place in the natural world. Not as separate masters of creation, but as participants in an intricate web of relationships with beings whose inner lives might be different from our own, but no less rich or significant. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the cabin, an aging bear and his younger companion continued their journey together through moonlit forests and hushed meadows, carrying between them a fragment of memory that connected past to future, human to wild individual life, to the great ongoing story of this remarkable planet that was home to them all. In the years that followed, the story of Rebecca, Samson, and the small mountain town that had witnessed their extraordinary connection continued to spread, touching lives around the world and changing how people perceived their relationship with the natural world. The scientific papers, documentary films, and conservation initiatives that grew from this single remarkable case helped transform wildlife management practices and public attitudes toward large predators. More significantly, the recognition that animals possessed complex emotional and cognitive lives beyond what science had previously acknowledged inspired a fundamental shift in how humans approached their relationship with the planet they shared with countless other beings, not as resources to be managed or problems to be solved, but as fellow travelers on the journey of existence, each with their own irreplaceable perspective on what it meant to be alive on Earth. And in Whispering Pines, where it had all begun, the bronze statue in the town square, a woman with a camera kneeling beside a massive bear, their gazes meeting in mutual recognition, stood as a permanent reminder of the transformative power of truly seeing beyond boundaries, of recognizing kinship with the wider community of life that had always surrounded humanity, waiting to be acknowledged. The ancient pine tree in the meadow, where a bear had maintained a memorial for 17 years, became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand this extraordinary story. Though access remained carefully restricted to protect the site's integrity, those fortunate enough to visit often reported feeling something beyond words, a sense of connection that transcended the usual separations between human and wild, past and present, ending and continuation. Perhaps that was Rebecca's greatest legacy, not just the scientific revolution her story had inspired or the conservation advances it had catalyzed, but the simple, profound recognition that love, in its purest form, recognized no boundaries. That when beings truly saw each other across the divides humans had created, something miraculous could emerge. A connection that persisted through time, that passed from generation to generation, that reminded all who encountered it of the extraordinary web of relationship that united all living things in ways both mysterious and luminous. And in that recognition lay not just understanding but wisdom, the awareness that the truest measure of human advancement might not be technological mastery or control over nature, but the capacity to enter into relationship with the wider community of life, to listen as well as speak, to learn as well as teach, to recognize in the eyes of other beings, even those most different from ourselves, the shared mystery of consciousness experiencing itself in countless unique forms throughout the magnificent tapestry of life on Earth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.